Today, I want to journey to the quiet streets in Georgia's Satilla Shores. It's a place that on an ordinary afternoon, seemingly, became the backdrop for a heartbreaking, shocking event that ignited a national, worldwide conversation about race, justice, and the very definition of suspicion. This is the story of Ahmaud Arbery. It was February 23rd of 2020. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, a beautiful day. Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old Black man, an avid runner, known for his infectious smile and kind heart, went for a jog on a normal average day. He often did this in his neighborhood and the surrounding areas. He was an athlete. He was a former high school football player, and running was the way for him that he chose to stay fit, but also to clear his head and enjoy the outdoors. Little did he know that this particular run would be his last. Pride, the deadly sin. Pride is defined as an excessive love of oneself, excessive belief in one's abilities and qualities. It's often considered the root of all other sins. This is the why behind the crime, the motive. I'm Ashely Willcott. I'm a TV anchor, a judge, a trial lawyer, and I would say that in almost all of the cases that I've covered, every case intersects with one of the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, wrath, lust, envy, gluttony, sloth, the opposite of the heavenly virtues. Temptations that, taken too far, turn deadly. This week, we break down the case of the victim Ahmaud Arbery and how the deadly sin of pride caused his death at the hand of local residents who literally chased him down and murdered him in cold blood. A little later, I'm actually joined by one of the defense attorneys that represented one of the 3 defendants in this case. His name is Kevin Gough, and we will go deep on the how and the why of one of the most talked about racially charged cases, when deeply intertwined with personal pride and ego, can escalate to cold-blooded murder. Let's get into it. This is the Deadly 7. As Ahmaud ran down Satilla Drive, he passed by a house that was under construction. And this is where the story turns dark. Gregory McMichael lived in the neighborhood. He was a retired police officer, and he was at home when he saw Ahmaud. For reasons that are still debated and still heavily scrutinized, McMichael believed Ahmaud matched the description of someone who had been entering one of the unfinished homes. So he ran inside his own home. He alerted his son, Travis McMichael, and they armed themselves. Gregory grabbed a .357 Magnum handgun. Travis grabbed a shotgun. They hopped into Gregory's pickup truck, and they began to chase Ahmaud. Remember, Ahmaud's running on his feet. They're chasing him in a truck. It's crucial to understand at this time that no crime had been committed by Ahmaud. They just knew, they thought Ahmaud matched the description of someone who had been entering and taking things from this unfinished home. These 2 men, fueled by their suspicion and armed with guns, decided to take law into their own hands. Here's what they did. They pursued Ahmaud aggressively. They're in the pickup truck. They're yelling at him from their truck, ordering him to stop. A 3rd man, William Roddy Bryan, he lived in the same neighborhood. He joined the pursuit in his own vehicle, and he began recording on his cell phone. This video footage of him recording what was happening would later become a central, but also, just to be transparent, a very disturbing piece of evidence in this case, because it offered the chilling account, hard-to-watch account of the final moments of Ahmaud Arbery's life. For several minutes, the chase continued. Ahmaud running. You could see him running, scared, running away from the 2 trucks, or first truck and the second vehicle that are pursuing him. And he's trying to evade the men. He's obviously terrified. The video shows the McMichaels cutting him off with their truck. Travis McMichael is seen exiting the vehicle with the shotgun. There's a brief confrontation, a struggle. We don't know exactly what words were exchanged, but what happens next? The first shot rings out. Ahmaud stumbles, but he tries to defend himself. There's another shot, and then a third final shot, the fatal shot. Ahmaud Arbery collapses in the middle of the road. The video captures his last moment, a young man's life extinguished in broad daylight. And what stood out to me the most and disturbed me the most, as he lay literally dying on the road, no one approached him. None of those three men approached him or tried to help him. No one approached him until one of the arriving officers finally did. In the immediate aftermath, the McMichaels claimed self-defense. And here's what they said. They said Ahmaud had attacked Travis and that they were therefore forced to shoot him. But the lack of any evidence of a crime committed by Ahmaud, coupled with the aggressive pursuit in a truck while Ahmaud's on foot, and the fact that they initiated the confrontation while they were armed, painted a very different picture. And again, fortunately, it's on video, so everybody could see what happened. For more than 2 months, though, 2 months, there were no arrests made. The local authorities seemed hesitant to charge these individuals, a retired law enforcement agent, as well as his son and the third. It wasn't until that video, that graphic video taken by William Roddy Bryan, was leaked online in May of 2020. It wasn't until that, sparking national outrage and demands for justice, that the investigation really began to gain momentum. The GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, took over the case, and within days, Gregory and Travis McMichael were arrested and charged with murder and aggravated assault. And the third, driving in the vehicle behind, was arrested shortly thereafter, facing those same similar charges. The trial was closely watched by an entire nation. It was gripping. The prosecution argued that Ahmaud Arbery was simply a black man running through a neighborhood, and that the actions of the three defendants were based on racist assumptions in that vigilante mindset. The defense, though, maintained they suspected Arbery of burglary, and they were acting in self-defense. Ultimately, in November of 2021, a jury found all three men guilty of felony murder and other charges as well, and they are still in jail, all three. But this case really laid bare the deep-seated issues of racial injustice in America, and a tragic reminder, many believe, of the dangers of the racial bias and the importance of equal justice for all. Joining me now, criminal defense attorney Kevin Gough. And Kevin, you may not know this, but I've known who you are for a long time because of your reputation. Because not only are you a great criminal defense attorney, you're a loud criminal defense attorney. And by that, I mean you zealously represent your clients in your cases. You don't let go, which is what every client deserves and is entitled to. Criminal defense attorney in South Georgia, I have had the honor of working with Kevin. And in this case, let's talk Ahmaud Arbery first, because you represent and represented during the course of the criminal trial William Roddy Bryan. We know he was in the vehicle behind the truck that was being driven with Greg and Travis McMichael while Ahmaud Arbery was in the neighborhood. So we know that with a conviction, all three are in prison. Tell me kind of when people ask you about this case, what's your response? What do you say or think first about this case?
Well, I mean, I think it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy all the way around. And obviously there's a young man who's no longer with us. And there's three people that are paying perhaps not the ultimate price, but as close to that as you can get. I'm sure you visited our Georgia prison system over the years. It's just not a pleasant place to be, you know. So I feel for all of the parties involved, but I feel especially for Roddy because I know Roddy the best. And, to see him rotting away in a prison cell is tough. And, he's supposed to have an appeal, and this trial was in what? The fall of 2021?
21. Mm-hmm.
And we're now shortly heading into the fall of 2025.
Yeah.
And his case hasn't even gotten to the appeals court yet. That's 4 years.
That's
So it'll be
crazy. I
5.
didn't realize that, Kevin. I did not. I know there's a backlog. We all know that if you practice in Georgia, but I didn't realize it was that lengthy of a backlog.
Well, there's complicating factors. I think one of the attorneys for one of the co-defendants passed away unexpectedly during the appellate process. But, 4 years is a long time to wait to get to the Court of Appeals, and I'm not blaming anybody. It's a complicated situation, and then they have a federal appeal. We haven't seen a ruling on that. It looks ironically like there'll be a ruling from the 11th Circuit, the federal case, before there's a ruling on the state case, although the state case was tried first. So, it's tough not only on the 3 gentlemen who are in prison, it's tough on their families. They can't plan their lives, but as you all know, it's not unusual for these cases to drag out on appeal, particularly complex cases. And the Arbery case is a complex case. And I know when I say that, some people get offended by that.
Yes.
But I call it the Arbery case. I'm going to continue to call it the Arbery case.
And there are people that are offended by it, but the fact of the matter is Ahmaud Arbery is the name of the person who did die in this case, this convictions of all 3 for the murder, understanding those are the current convictions. And your client's involvement was different. He did not pull a trigger. That was McMichael's son. And they were in a vehicle going along. He then was following later in his vehicle and actually videoed. And so to me, there's an argument. He's the good guy, right? Like to say that there's a video that shows what happened and he's the person that chose to video, I think is a positive thing in a narrative that, and I'm not taking sides, but the narrative is that these were racist individuals that chased him down in a truck and murdered him in cold blood. But I think your client's position is a little bit different given his involvement.
Oh, well, clearly, Roddy's in a different position. And really, in a lot of ways, he was trying to do the right thing. And, I don't know that I would have had that kind of courage to of course, I'm a lawyer. If Columbus had lawyers on the boat, he never would have reached America. The legal team would have convinced him to turn back. But, fortunately, people do the right thing every day. And sometimes, they say no good deed goes unpunished. And it's a situation where Roddy's paying a heavy price. And he is essentially, if you know Roddy, he is essentially a good man. And he tries to do the right thing. But it's just a tragedy all the way around. But I'll always call it the Arbery case. And I know that offends some people. But that's just where I'm at. And, like before we got on today, I Googled about it. I Googled Arbery case. Okay. Because it's just simpler. But, people ask me about it all the time. People come up to me all the time. And it's an amazing world that we live in. I could be sitting at a restaurant and, the Fisherman's Wharf from San Francisco, and somebody will come up to me. I was in Maine a couple years ago. Somebody came up to me. And, everybody has different perspectives on it. You want to honor people's different perspectives because they come from legitimate, authentic places. So you never really know, but you'd be surprised how many people come up to me and just just feel terrible about Roddy's plight and the way his situation was handled. It's not politically correct for people to talk about it, but there is and remains and always will be a substantial number of people in America that believe that Roddy Bryan did not get justice in this case.
And I believe that. Because, again, factually, it's different. And I a lot of viewers on Court TV commenting and watching all of this unfold, it was a divisive case, right? There were people on both sides of terms of what they thought and their perspectives, but I think many would say that what his involvement was factually was different. It just was. You can't take away from that. It's factually a very different case. So, we talk about some of the deadly sins as motive. And in this one, I look at pride or ego because I feel like it started from the very beginning from a prideful place of their belief as articulated in trial. I'm going to protect our neighborhood. This has been happening in our neighborhood, and this person matches a description, and I'm not going to sit back as ex-law enforcement and just let this happen. And I'm not saying they intended to kill anyone. I don't think that they ran out of their house and said, we're going to go kill I don't believe that to be the case at all. But I also think that there's an element of we're going to go do what we believe to be the right thing that then turned tragic.
Yes. I think it started out with good intentions. And I know that doesn't fit the narrative that certain people have put on it. A very profitable narrative for some. But as you've seen, Ashely, in other cases, including some of your own, when the media get a hold of something, and I'm not picking on you, okay?
Sure.
When the media get a hold of things and they take on a life of their own, they spin out of control in sometimes unexpected directions. And literally, the media has the power to literally bend reality to its narrative. It's just that powerful. At some point, people stop questioning what they're seeing, in the mainstream media. And I'm not saying that all the big networks or whatever are, in some grand conspiracy. It's just the way life works. And the perception that went out through the trial was seriously divorced from the reality of what we were seeing in the courtroom. I mean, you could go to court and think, and you've been there as a lawyer, you go there to court, you had a good day, right? And then you come out and you see the media spin on it, and it's like the names and the faces may match, but it's like they were in a different place. Other times you come out and you think you just stunk up the room, and the media, whoever, are fawning all over some great thing that was done. It's very difficult for the media to cover court cases, and it's very difficult to do it accurately, and especially when there's all these forces out there that can actually pressure the media and almost bend reality. But I think the Arbery case was one in which that took place. And I've seen other incidents like that, but that's the only one that I've personally, been involved with.
And I think it's why I am so adamant covering trials. You need a lawyer. You need a lawyer who's been in court. You need a lawyer who's been in the system. And the reason I say that, Kevin, and I want you to weigh in on this, is the problem is, and we both know this, what happens in the courtroom in the actual trial is only a small part of everything about the case, because there's so many pretrial motions. There's so much information that a court may rule is not relevant, is not admissible, is overly prejudicial, isn't overly prejudicial. By the time you get through all the pretrial motions and you've looked at every single thing about the case representing your client, necessarily you only see a portion of that during the actual trial. And that means the media only gets a portion of that in watching the trial. And I think that's what sometimes viewers and listeners forget, is they're not getting all of the information necessarily because of our criminal justice system.
No, they're not. And some of it is information overload. I mean, a lot of the media people, when you get to a certain level, I mean, clearly, in Brunswick, we don't have that. But by the time you get to the national media and some of the bigger markets, you got actual lawyers, in the sense that they've graduated from law school. They have law degrees. They may not practice, they might have, but even then, they have difficulty when you get into bigger, more complex cases, particularly in subject matters that they're not personally familiar. So you can understand that if media people, professionals with legal backgrounds struggle to keep up with things, you can imagine how the average member of the public struggles to keep up. But, you made good points. Having good representation matters. And having representation with the right experience matters. You can be a great lawyer in one thing and not really know something else. And it's always dangerous to dabble. And I've been asked to dabble more than I'd like. I think we've all been there. But it makes a real difference. I have seen lawyers, and I'm not naming names, okay? I have seen lawyers walk out in the hallway and just break down in tears because they're overwhelmed. Generally, they're younger lawyers. It's not necessarily younger lawyers, but, or they'll go in the bathroom. I had a case one time with a very experienced lawyer. We almost had to delay the case. He ended up having to go to the hospital. He was having chest pains towards the end of the day. And he was not unfamiliar with being on a big stage, okay? But you really want a lawyer who is used to dealing with it. When you go to court normally, it's not really high stakes. It's not really high pressure. I mean, it might be a murder case. It might be, some other serious case. But on a day-to-day basis, the stakes are not usually that high, particularly when nobody cares about your homeless client, that stabbed the proprietor because, he looked at him funny or whatever. Nobody's paying attention. But when you get to a certain level and there's a certain amount of attention or eyes on the case, everything changes. The judges that, mentored you or in law school, are now scowling down at you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Lawyers that, you were out having drinks with a month ago are now asking for your head on a plate. People that you've gone to church with for 20 years have gone from bringing you, lunch, when you got out of the hospital or when a loved one died, to yelling at the top of their lungs outside the courtroom as you go in. And you need to have a lawyer who is comfortable with that and isn't going to respond to it. I don't know how else to say that, but, it can be a mistake because you can be a great lawyer, but it's easy to get overwhelmed.
Yes. I have to tell you, I will never forget, I was representing DFACS as a Special Assistant Attorney General, and all of us lawyers, it was a smaller rural community in North Georgia, and we all got along well, as I'm sure you do, they're your colleagues, they're your people. You go to church with them, you see them, right? And so my client one day was like, how can you even speak to them? How can you be friends with them? And I'm like, wait, this is our job. This is not our life. This is our job. We zealously represent our client, but it doesn't mean I may not have lunch or dinner with them. And they were surprised by that. They thought, well, I can't believe that. But to me, I'm like, this is a job in the courtroom. And it does change when you become center stage and one of this caliber in which you represented one of the three. And Kevin, I think, too, that people don't always realize that attorneys need to stay in their own lane. So you and I have worked together on a case where I will tell anybody, I don't do criminal defense. I've never done criminal defense. I don't have the experience, nor do I have the personality for that. I do child welfare, and that's my lane. And I know I'm good at it because I've done it forever. The rest of it, I'm going to hire an expert. So let's transition a little to some of the things you're seeing in court and in cases. You and I have had a crazy case in Wayne County. And I feel like our criminal justice system is at a place now where anybody could be charged with anything. And that sounds like Chicken Little and the sky is falling. But I feel like we're seeing more of that.
We are. And don't take it personally, but I think some of it is the court TV problem.
Tell me more. What do you mean by that?
When I first started practicing, when I came to Brunswick in, 89, in the DA's office, there was no local TV station. We had one briefly. It came in the early 90s. There was a fad. All the small towns in Georgia had a TV station for 5 or 10 years, and they all kind of disappeared. But generally speaking, there was almost no coverage of court proceedings. It was extremely rare. And as lawyers, our dealings with the media were almost non-existent. You may remember John B. Johnson. He's a former chief assistant at Someway. controversial. Um, but, his solution for dealing with the media was a traditional prosecutorial position, which is just to ignore them. And for years, the local TV station, they tried to get an interview with him during a big case. And John literally opened the closet door and walked in the closet and stayed in the closet, until they left him alone. And they would show the picture of John walking in the closet for years because it was the only
That's all they had.
Right. And then things changed. Stephen Kelly was DA for a long time. And he came in with a different attitude, which is if you don't engage the media to some extent, they're not going to help you. Like they'll put the most unflattering picture they can find of you up for 20 years. So, he would at least meet, they wanted a photo opportunity. The Fulton Daily Journal wanted a photo opportunity. So he made the lawyers working on the case come out to the courthouse steps. So at least they would have a presentable picture, But now, as there's more and more media attention on these cases, it's changing things. Court coverage used to be a couple minutes a day on 3 networks, and now you've got entire networks flowing through. So it's changing everything. It's changing the rules. I mean,
how is it, sorry to interrupt, but how is it changing the rules? Because to me, it offers transparency. It is the ability for everyone to see how our criminal justice system works. In my opinion, that also increases people's knowledge, education, and rights to know things like, and I'll tell anybody, don't talk to the police. Stop talking to the police. Hire an attorney and do what your attorney tells you to. And all of those things, I think, are really improved by the transparency. So how do you think it's changing the rules?
Well, it's changed the rules for lawyers. I mean, the rules for clients have never changed. Don't talk to the police. Call a lawyer. If you're going to talk to the police, have a lawyer there with you.
Yes.
Unlike law and order, in the real world, when the lawyer tells the client to shut up, they shut up.
Yeah.
As opposed to like Law and Order, where they tell the lawyer to shut up so they can go confess.
Right.
Because in the real world, DAs and prosecutors, defense lawyers sit with the clients. I mean, that doesn't really happen. But what's changed for the lawyers is a conventional wisdom was not to talk to the media, not to try your cases in the media. That usually talking to the media was the risk was not worth the reward. And certainly it's a lot more effort. People think that lawyers just address media things off the cuff, and there probably are a few, but in my experience, very little happens that isn't thought out in advance.
Because it's all part of the trial strategy. It has to be necessarily. It has to be part of your strategy.
Years ago we had I call it the I-95 rapist case. The guy was allegedly raping women. Well, he was convicted, but allegedly raping women on the side of the road back in the day. And, we brought the wife in and we had a press conference, which is, I think, the first press conference I had. And so she got up there and she stood by her husband. It was like 30 seconds, prepared remarks, one or two brief, I'm not even sure we allowed questions. And that was in the mid-90s, 95, 97, something like that. And she did fine. But let me tell you now, that generated a whole, I can't use that word on a podcast, a whole flurry of response. I can remember a judge at one point telling me, if you want to talk to the media about that, you can. Okay. Which he really didn't want me to, but that's a different story. But even then, at that point in the 90s, it was still relatively rare. Whereas now there's so much coverage of cases that if you don't talk to the media, if you don't arrange for your client's position to be represented in some, and in big cases, it's a relief in the sense that a lot of times the families will get PR people, right?
Right.
Certainly the Arbery family had very able representation in dealing with the media. But most clients can't do that. But the lawyers you can't put your head in the sand because these cases are won and lost sometimes before you actually get in the courtroom. And I'm not a big believer in it. I don't know what the solution is because, like you said, there are public benefits to the public being aware of what goes on in our courtrooms. But ever since we had OJ, and OJ fundamentally changed how the media is viewed with respect to trials.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just gone from there. But nowadays, in a big case, you can't sit back and let the victim's family and their lawyers and their media people kill your client before you get there. Even in Arbery, the impact of the pretrial publicity was huge. I mean,
Is it something that you think about if you take a big case or take a case media is covering, that you think about, Kevin, and say, okay, let me get out in front of this. Let me get to the media and put out, strategy wise, the narrative of your defense or whatever your client's position is to assist strategically with jury selection and the way the case proceeds?
yeah, if you can see, and Ashley, you've been doing this a long time, you kind of have a feel for cases that could become of interest to the media.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lucky, they don't. It's always easier for lawyers to work because most of what we do is work cases out. I mean, if any lawyer that says he doesn't plea bargain is just not being candid. And most cases will resolve. And when you're looking at the case, you don't really know early on. Sometimes you know, but sometimes you don't.
Sure.
And a lot of times it doesn't pan out, but you have to be prepared and you have to take it into account. Among other things, Ashley, as you well know, the media it's every man for himself in the media, okay? Everybody wants their story, their exclusive, their this, their that, and they don't hesitate to ask. So, you have to factor in the time that's involved
Mm-hmm.
in fielding all that stuff. Because if you ignore it, then they get pissy and they say bad stuff about your client, sometimes just to make sure that the next time that they call, that you answer.
And that's not a good journalist, by the way, but go ahead. Those are the bad journalists that do that, but I know it happens.
They're out there.
Yeah.
There's all kinds. But
Yeah.
you have to anticipate the time that's going to be involved. And you also have to anticipate your client's resources. For example, Roddy Bryan he's not stupid, but he has a limited education and a limited intellect. I'm not saying that he's stupid. And I've seen people say that. I've never said that. But he's limited in some respects. And so letting him deal with the media is fraught with peril. It's always fraught with peril.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you and I have known some other clients more recently that are much more media savvy. Reporters and journalists like them. And frankly, it's less of a burn because you can't stop them from talking. Whether
True.
they should or not, they're going to do it anyway. But that takes some of the pressure off you as the lawyer.
Yeah. And at least they get to the place where they say, okay, I'm going to talk to the media. This is what I'd like to say. Is this going to affect my case? Is there anything? And then we're able to say, okay, this is okay, but let's not go there and help shape what they say simply to protect their rights and their constitutional rights when they get inside that courtroom.
Yes. Yes. Even if they're media savvy, you still end up having to invest some time in reviewing things because you prefer not to read your client's words about a pending criminal case before the case is over. You don't want to read it for the first time walking in the courthouse and the bailiff hands you his copy of the paper.
Yeah.
That's never a good plan.
No.
So, but lawyers that still maintain that they're never going to talk to the media, that they're not going to have anything to say in a high profile case, it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I would agree. And Karen Reed is a great example of media attention, right? Like that had more attention than any other case I've seen probably since OJ. And I think it shaped the narrative for both sides, quite frankly, right? It was very divisive and you had both sides, but people chose to pick and choose from what was reported and what they heard to decide what their perception was of exactly what happened. I know that we're almost out of time, Kevin. I can't thank you enough. And one thing I appreciate you, we'll have transparent, honest conversations, no holes barred, but I'm very appreciative of that. Any last thoughts?
I just appreciate you having me on, and you are, as always, a gracious host. And I hope that your listeners appreciate the effort and the preparation, that you put into these programs.